Birds be circling, weaving to and fro, but they don't really seem to know which way to go. It's late January, and lawnmowers be moaning in protest against overtime, pleading their case. Those snowplows still shut up in storage shed, while flower beds be blooming before time. All the while, SUVs keep sending toxic exhaust into heaven, and glaciers drift free, melting like Chernobyl. Yet man, living supreme, ruling over all, remains oblivious to the changes. All I know is when even the birds don't know which way to go, somebody, somewhere better wake up before it's too late, before we all be looking for some place to migrate, even the birds.
License and registration, he can sense your aggravation.
On the head of the fallen angel.
When the world is muttering under the floorboards, stomp even louder.
Time.
Let them know you are alive today.
Or unhum.
Did you know that your hands came with a ripple effect?
Whisper tones unraveling like silk.
Blood, sweat, and tears win by any means poetry.
Sway, look at me. Is a piece of the pie too good for me?
Some may call it rock the mic. We call it poetry.
Hello, and welcome to Sojourn with Words, right here on CTV. We know that poetry is significant everywhere, but none greater than Prince George's County, and that's where we're airing from. So, poetry, and with one of the foremost poets, previously a longtime resident of Prince George's County, but this time we know that we're pulling him back into the fold. I'm speaking of my featured poet for today, Hiram Larew. And of course, anybody who's been in Prince George's County for any length of time knows Hiram Larew if you're connected with poetry at all. Let me share a little bit about Hiram before I bring him on and start querying him about what he's up to these days. Hiram Larew. His poems have recently found homes in Poetry South, Contemporary American Voices, Best Poetry Online, and Amsterdam Quarterly. Nominated for 4 National Pushcart Awards, his poems have placed first in competitions from Louisiana Literature, the Washington Review, Baltimore Artscape, and others. His most recent collection, Undone, was issued in 2019 by Foothills Publishing, and his next full-length collection will be published by Atmosphere Press. He's a member of the Shakespeare Folger Library's Poetry Board and is the organizer of several poetry initiatives, including Voices of Woodlawn, a program of poetry, music, and artwork that imagines the lives of the enslaved community at a plantation in Fairfax, Virginia. Now there's more. Hiram. Well, let's talk about Poetry X Hunger. His initiative was supported by the United Nations, the Capital Area Food Bank, the Maryland State Arts Council, Split This Rock, and others. The Poetry X Hunger initiative is really bringing poets from around the world to the anti-hunger cause. As a courtesy, faculty member or Woodrow Wilson Visiting Fellow at Oregon State University, Montana State University, Baylor University, Pennsylvania State University, and Hood College, Larew offers lectures on poetry, food security, and related topics. He is retired from the United States Department of Agriculture, where he guided international farming programs. Hiram currently lives in Churchton, Maryland. Welcome back, I should say. Welcome back to Sojourn with Words, Hiram Larew.
Thank you, Sister Joy. And thank you so much for the ongoing, I think now 15 years of dedication to Sojourn with Words. It's such a delight to be with you today and to, through that, celebrate our shared passion, interest, love of poetry. I really appreciate it.
Absolutely. We're excited that you have not shied away, even though you've traveled away from Prince George's County. We get to reel you back in and let folks know about the excellence that you bring to poetry. And for those that don't know, Hiram Larew is one of the Poets of Excellence from 2020 in Prince George's County, where that is officially a moniker, a title that he has earned through his contributions and support for poetry in the community. So, Poet of Excellence, Hiram Larew. Again, I say welcome.
Well, thank you, Sister Joy. And you know, I have to say, it's just wonderful to be with you and your incredible outreach to poets. You mentioned here a second ago that there are just so many poets you want to showcase. And you know, that's one cool indication of the impact of your work. There are poets coming from all corners of the county, really all corners of all corners, to work with you, celebrate with you, and be amazed by the work that you're doing as poet laureate for as the inaugural poet from Prince George's County.
Well, thank you. As Poet Laureate, I do take it as a serious responsibility to ensure that poetry is heard everywhere. And of course, with your, poetry poster project, poetry wasn't just heard everywhere, it was seen everywhere, because you took poetry and elevated it as it rightfully is, it should be, to that beautiful visual art platform. Can you tell us a little bit about the poetry poster project that you
Sure.
inaugurated in Prince George's County?
And which you participated in, you had poems included in it. Yeah, I was over at the Maryland's House of Delegates several years back on an arts advocacy effort and noticed that they had a lot of beautiful artwork displayed in the hallways there by artists from Maryland. And I thought, well, you know, why couldn't we have some poems by Maryland poets displayed here? And so, to make that long story short, 5 African-American poets, including you, Sister Joy, and 1 Native American poet from the county. All of the poets were living in the county at that time, Prince George's County. They're not currently, not all of them are currently, but they were at that time. Shared some poems with me. I got some support from the Prince George's Arts and Humanities Council to frame those poems, print them in large font, and frame them as artwork so that they could be hung up on walls with a brief explanation of what they were and a short note about each poet. And those poems, they were displayed in libraries, in office buildings, in wineries, in churches, in office buildings. I mean, all over the place. The culminating...
And art galleries.
And art galleries, absolutely. And the culminating show was at the Maryland House of Delegates. They went back to where the concept had come from. And so that was very exciting. Yeah. And all to kind of raise the awareness within the county and beyond that there is some incredible talent in poetry talent in Prince George's County. And I think we were fairly successful in making that point.
I agree. I know it was wonderful being on tour, as it were, with that wonderful initiative. And we were just thrilled that so many people were responsive to and supportive of coming out to those readings and experiencing poetry in a new light, as it were. So thank you, Hiram, for that opportunity. both for the Prince George's community, but also for poets that had perhaps not considered poetry in that light. Now, you're one that you always step outside the box, and that's one of the things that I love about you and your poetry. One of the other initiatives that you have established, as was mentioned during the introductory bio, was your work with the Poetry X Hunger initiative. This is, again, a socially focused poetry cause that you saw an opportunity and a need. Can you speak to us about Poetry X Hunger?
As you mentioned, I'm retired from U.S. Department of Agriculture, where I worked on I helped guide international farming programs, and confronted a lot of hunger internationally and increasingly hunger in the US. And while I was working at USDA, I was also a poet, but I never brought those two worlds together. When I retired, I decided, I probably need to bring my two areas of interest and really love together. And as I looked up and around to find poems about hunger, not hunger of the heart, not hunger of the spirit or the soul, but hunger of the stomach, I couldn't find many. There were a few, but not many. And so I thought, well, maybe this is one thing I could contribute to, is to engage with poets from around the world and see if I could enlist their help in speaking back to hunger through their poems. And so I started this informal initiative called Poetry X Hunger. And to fast forward now, we have a website that has about 250 poems on it, posted to it, that from poets all over the world, all ages, that anti-hunger groups, professors and teachers and community leaders are using to speak back to hunger in their meetings, in their newsletters, in their messaging, and the like. So I understand poetry will never end hunger, but can it contribute? Absolutely. Absolutely. So that's what that's all about.
Wonderful, wonderful. Now, let's talk a little bit specifically about your poetry. You like the element of surprise in your poetry. Tell us, why is that so important to you?
Well, for me, poetry, I love all types of poems and have always. But I think as I kind of look back and also look ahead, I realize that it's poems that meet me with an unexpected handshake or grab that I tend to remember and keep with me long after I put the poem down or stopped hearing it. And I can't explain what it is about that surprise, but I think it's that unexpectedness, possibly a little twist in logic that I just find very interesting, so that and really engaging, so that out of kind of a new take that the poet has presented, I just find it really helpful to enjoy the new approach, the new way of saying things or presenting things on the page. For some reason, I'm just a kid about enjoying seeing surprises in poems.
Okay. Now, I've heard that people compare your work to that of perhaps E. Cummings. Do you agree? And why would you say that is?
Yeah, I think it's because sometimes I kind of arrange the poems and use diction and what I call kind of fractured streams in the poems. And Mr. Cummings was an expert. I'll never forget, Sister Joy, one of the first times I saw a poem by him. And I just couldn't believe that somebody could do something with words like that. Now, there are a lot of other people who have influenced me, like with you, I'm sure. But it was his innovative leaps and word combinations, and just through all of that, expressive joy in his work that I found incredibly eye-opening. So yeah, he influenced me. Whether or not I could ever be anything like or produce anything like his work, I don't know so much about that.
Well, now your poems often end with that kind of upside down, inside out, insight. What do you want our readers to know? No, you're going to be sharing some of those poems in a few minutes, but what do you want our readers to and listeners and viewers today to take away from your poems? What is it that
I'm sure that I'm not always successful. What I enjoy trying to do is to draw the reader and listener in, give them enough solid ground that they kind of get a sense of what's going on in the poem, but then also with a twist, maybe at the end or somewhere in the poem, take them out of themselves, take them out of the poem a bit, and have them kind of think a little bit, maybe beyond what they were expecting at the end. So I'd like to try to insert a little bit of surprise in my poems as well. And I have found, I don't know about you, Sister Joy, but I've also found lately that I'm enjoying using rhythm and rhyme, or what I call the music in poems, to kind of convey that sense of joy and gratitude.
Okay. Well, let's see now. You talk about joy. What brings you joy in poetry? And this is pretty much a wrap-up question, because we're going to get to the poetry in 1 second. But what brings you joy in poetry?
I think my ears grin whenever I can hear the joy conveyed by a poet in the tone of voice, in the rhythm of presentation, and in their word choice. If I'm reading a poem on a page, it's how is the poem arranged on the page? In other words, how is it presented? Can you tell whether or not in writing it, the poet was, what kind of state of mind was she or he in when they wrote it? And if there's a little bit of happiness or giddiness or joy in the poem, for me, that's kind of attractive. I think these days and times, we need a little bit of joy in our lives through poems. We need a lot of other things through poems as well. We need self-reflection and societal reflection, but I think we also need a little bit of joy. It's a balm.
Okay, a balm, absolutely. Well, let's now receive some of that balm. Let's now hear some poetry by the illustrious and the unimagined fabulous leaps with words that Hiram Larew brings through his poetry. Hiram, what would your first poem be that shows this fun, this flip side, you've already told us what you want your poetry to be. So how about we hear some poetry by Hiram Larew?
This first piece, I believe, got started when I stepped out onto a front porch in the early morning and was just, again, grateful and amazed with what I heard, saw, smelled, felt. It's a kind of a wonder, but also a wander in nature. It appeared in a journal called Ponder Savant. It's called Quiets Come. All is up. Yes. All is sky. All is wings and tops and rise. All is up. These branches hum and whistles high. How quiets come. Or beams of clouds, this world of still that flies towards yes and shall, above what will and all, where most of more calls glowing. So that's one of the pieces that I kind of consider a gratitudes poem, Sister Joy.
Okay. Well, keep going. Give us more.
Okay. I was lucky enough a few years back when we were all still traveling to visit Ireland and wrote this piece while I was there. There's a mention of the potato blight, which caused a famine in Ireland from 1845 to 1849. This piece first appeared in Words for the Wild. It's titled, Achill Sound, which is a body of water you had to cross to get from mainland Ireland to the island, Achill Island, where I was staying. Achill Sound. When the roads curve like sound and dip as if lifting to bow, whenever all thoughts round or cluster or when hearts call down, is Ireland. And as rich when poor was, or as wise as bare heads in snow seemed, and as twigs so frail broke into song, and as true as any blight or potato could be, was Ireland. So, when sand laps the senses, or salt drips the edges as dreams, whenever hope streams through such heavens, and moss comes home, or hearts beam down, is Ireland. So my love of Ireland. This next piece is a look back in wonder. Johnny Chapman was also known as Johnny Appleseed, and he lived late 1700s, early 1800s, and he was kind of the near fabled planter of apple seeds over much of the US in the early 1800s. And this piece first appeared in a journal called West Trade Review. It's titled Losing Birthdays. One of my grandmothers grew deep red geraniums on her front porch for everyone strolling by in the summer to admire. My other grandmother trained a rose bush of palest pinks and heavenly scent up over her back door. I was lost. And so there is how just now these fields of sunrise forget such birthdays, while blackbirds pick and ticks climb up. What good am I at taking such things inside? These deepest loves and smallest sounds. And I've been told that wherever he went, my imaginary uncle caused people to shyly grin. He was strange, they all said, but people loved him anyway for his dreamy ways. He was just like Johnny Appleseed, who I still believe dropped barefoot seeds on every spot that could be found, poor or steep, year by year, from here to then.
Oh, yes, Johnny Appleseed. That was fabulous, fabulous, fabulous. Thank you. Well, how about we get one more? We're going to squeeze in as much as we can. So thank you, Hiram Larew. Again, for our Sojourn with Words viewers, this is Hiram Larew.
Thank you, Sister Joy. This one is read with loving respect in another voice. It first appeared on Vox Poetica website. It's called Smart Dumb. She was born inside out, the size of a heavy orange. And the story goes that she was wobbly from the very start. Even as a little girl, she was so smart and so damn dumb together. That's the way sometimes. Well, wouldn't you know that dead solved the problem? The full story isn't important, but what is that at about 19 or so, she fell jaw drop in love with someone who just wouldn't, couldn't, and didn't. Someone like too close to a fire. Yes, with those kind of eyes. And the thing was, there was no warning her at all, not any. And oh my, the rumors were rich enough to live on. And here's the thing, really, she ended up like a tree toppled over with all the roots up in the air. Hers was a big sideways life that just never really got started. And of course, she's gone now, but is wholly famous. That's what starting out with too many wants will do in an all or nothing sort of way. So the lingering question is this: is it truly best to leave nature alone, or to invite it in for a chat over dinner?
Oh my gosh. I love, love, love that poem, Hiram Larew. What a perfect salutation. Saluton. Thank you, Hiram Larew, for being
Thank
a
you.
fabulous guest right here on Sojourn with Words. That was wonderful. Perfect way to close out. Viewers, I think you'll agree that this episode of Sojourn with Words with Hiram Larew is absolutely precious. Hiram, we welcome you back to Prince George's County anytime. We absolutely, absolutely adore your poetry, and keep writing, keep feeding us. It is so wonderful to hear your poetry.
Thank you so much, Sister Joy. You keep doing what you're doing too. You're just amazing. Take care.
Thank you. Well, that closes us out. Another episode of Sojourn with Words right here on CTV. Remember, always pick up a pen and keep writing.